Hi everybody, this is Byron Jacobs for dmbpoker.com, and today we're looking at a 100NL hand. In this hand I'm playing from the small blind with the hand 9-7 offsuit. There are 4 folds around to me and I decide to open raise from the small blind. Now in a previous video in a similar situation where I open raised from the small blind, John Little, when commentating, said that he would very much consider limping in these positions with a huge portion of his range, and in principle I very much agree, and if this was a tournament situation that's probably what I'd do, or if I were playing heads up I'd also do the same thing. However, in this game, which is played in PokerStars Zoom, this is NL100 at Zoom, where everyone's playing like hundreds of hands an hour, I've noticed that the player pool tends to fold far too much from the big blind in this situation. And also, if you take the pot down pre-flop, you don't pay any rake, which is certainly a fairly serious consideration when the big blind is overfolding in this position. So I like to raise here rather than limp like a lot of the time, simply because of the possibility of taking down the pot immediately. But I fully take John's opinion as to limping here in other situations, such as when you're playing heads up or maybe playing in a tournament, or when the rake isn't relevant for whatever reason. After I bet this flop, my opponent calls and the flop comes down 5-3 queen with 2 spades, which completely misses me, and now I've got to decide whether to c-bet or not. And having like a junky hand that has no realistic prospect of improving very much at all between now and the river, and thus having no showdown value, I prefer to make a c-bet, as I think this has only got to succeed 33% of the time, and I think he's going to be folding here sufficiently that this bet is going to be profitable. Unfortunately, in this instance, my opponent calls, and so we have $12 in the pot, and the turn brings the interesting 6 of clubs, which suddenly increases my equity fairly well, because now I have a double gut shot, with obviously the 4 and the 8 both completing a straight for me. I now decide to c-bet again, and I c-bet fairly big, around about 3/4 pot, because obviously I want to generate a lot of fold equity against these kind of ace highs and low pair type hands, and also when we get to showdown, a 9 or a 7 could also be good. So I think this bet to my eye looks fine, and the villain calls. Now, one thing I was definitely planning here when I c-bet on the turn was I thought that, as well as the fact that I can pretty much hit the nuts with 8 cards, a 9 or a 7 can also be good. And I also thought if an ace, a king or a jack came on the river, I would probably just shove the river, because with the sizings we've got here, there's going to be approximately 1 pot size bet left on the river, and I think it's going to be quite hard for him to call a river shove, a pot-sized shove, with just like 4th or 5th pair or some hand such as that, and I thought that would be a fairly substantial part of his range. I also had a little bit of a timing tell on the turn, in that the villain called pretty much instantly when I bet the turn. He didn't think at all, he just like instantly called this 70% pot size bet. And when players do that, I often tend to think that they have, a draw that they're not going to fold. So in this instance, when he did call instantly, I kind of thought that the spade draw was a big part of his range. So when the river brought the ace of spades, although I was planning to barrel on an ace, I kind of froze up slightly and started to think about the situation, which obviously isn't a good idea yourself in terms of a timing tell when you want to 3-bet barrel bluff the river. And eventually I decided that flushes were too great a part of his range, and I probably didn't have the fold equity to shove the river, so I just decided to check and give up the hand, and in fact it turned out that the villain shoved the river, and obviously I folded. So, as usual in this series, I've now keyed the hand into Poker Snowy, and we'll see what Snowy has to say about it before I pass over to John Little and see what he makes of the play. Okay, so we've got all the folds, and Snowy, as you can see down here with this marginal hand, perfectly happy with the open raise. The villain calls, and when the flop comes with the Queen 5-3 missing me, Snowy doesn't like my bet, although thinks this is very marginal. Although he wants to check 100% of the time, he seems to think betting is very slightly worse. So obviously I'm interested to hear what John thinks of that, because my inclination is very much to bet this hand, purely because I don't have any showdown value, and I think I do have fold equity, certainly with the immediate bet. And when the 6 comes on the turn, now Snowy is having picked up the extra equity with a double gut shot. Snowy's perfectly happy to barrel here, but this is something strange about Snowy that I don't understand. He's telling me that the optimal bet size is 0.25 pot. If I go to 0.25 pot, you'll see that a bet here is generating, according to Snowy, 1.43 of EV, whereas my chosen bet size generates 3.19 worth of EV, 3.19 big blinds worth of EV. So I don't quite understand why Snowy calls this suboptimal and then prefers this bet size, which apparently generates a lower EV. That isn't clear to me, but anyway, to continue the hand, the villain calls, and then when we get the possibility to bluff on the river, Snowy basically wants to shove here more often than not, although he thinks that the EV of the various plays is basically much the same. So that's the hand. I think it's quite interesting, and I'll be interested to see what John has to say about it. This has been Byron Jacobs for dmbpoker.com. Thank you for listening.
Hello, this is Jonathan Little. I definitely agree with your points about the rake being significant in smaller stakes games in general, and you are correct that my assessment to limp is primarily based on me playing mostly high stakes cash games and tournaments where the rake is somewhat minimal, or there's like a time rake to where it doesn't really matter how you play the hands. So, as the rake goes up, when you see a flop, you want to see fewer flops, and certainly raising accomplishes that. So if you are going to raise, I really just recommend you making it even bigger, like $4, because that's going to discourage your opponent from calling more often. So that's probably what I would do if I wanted to raise in this spot, maybe 3.5 or 4. When you make it 3, I think you're actually going to get called a lot. But that said, you have a better handle on these situations than I do because you're the one playing these games on a regular basis. And if you just look at your database in your Hold'em Manager or Poker Tracker, and you see that your opponents are folding too often or making a raise almost immediately profitable, then sure, raise with any 2 cards. I'm fine with that. But as we see here against Snowy, says either is fine, but it's still liking limping more often. So flop comes, and Snowy recommends checking. And the reason it's going to recommend checking here is because you just have absolutely nothing. And it also probably does not assume that you have much of a range advantage. So if you don't have much of a range advantage, and you have an absolute garbage hand, it's fine to just check fold. And also, if you do go check on this flop, you can certainly consider betting the turn, so it's not like you just lose every time you check. And checking here will allow you to build in some checks with some of your other marginal made hands, so you can easily have a checking range that is not just check folding. I think in this spot, I'm getting the vibe that you're going to continuation bet basically 100%, which I don't think is bad or anything. And as we see, Snowy says betting is acceptable. But either you need to bet 100% or you need to be betting less often with some of your checks just being your absolute garbage. And if you think about what is absolute garbage on this board, I mean, this is pretty much it because 7-6 has a straight draw, right? A gut shot. 8-7, I suppose, or 8-6 is pretty bad. 8-7 is pretty bad. 9-7 is pretty bad. 9-8 is pretty bad. So these are basically the worst hands you can have because every hand containing 2 lower cards has a gut shot of some sort, or a straight draw, or pair, or whatever. So that's probably why it's fine giving up here, and I probably would have checked here as well. Typically, you want to bet the flop with your best made hands and your draws, and check your marginal made hands and your junk. And sometimes some of your junk becomes draws, which leads you to betting it, but this is not really much of a draw at all. So this is just a very, very bad hand, and it's fine to just check fold bad hands. So you do bet, though, and you get called, which I don't have a problem with this. I think that's fine, and certainly good against people who are too tight. On the turn, you get basically the nut turn. You mentioned how Snowy says that, or at least says that this 0.25 bet size is better. I don't know what's up with that either. Maybe we can talk to the designers of the program. But I completely agree that if you're going to bet here, you want to bet on the bigger side. Off the top of my head, maybe it thinks you're risking a smaller amount to win this 1.43 equity. I don't really know. We need to study more on that to come up with the right answer. But I definitely agree that betting the turn here is good and mandatory. Similarly to what I was just saying on the flop, you want to be betting your best made hands and your draws. Well, here is a draw that has no showdown value, but still has some equity. So this is the ideal draw to bet. Because you can't really check call with it unless your opponent bets tiny. You could check raise with it. I don't think that would be insane, but I like betting as you do. It seems pretty good and standard. On the river, I would have gone for the all-in, though. Of course, you're always getting called by a flush, and you have no blockers to the flush. But if you think about hands that you could be bluffing with, what are they going to be? Well, you probably wouldn't bet the turn with King of Spades, 10 of clubs, right? You probably just are checking with those because they have a little bit of showdown value and not much equity at all. So which hands would you bet with on the turn that were draws that did not improve? And that's basically going to be hands like any hand containing a 4. There shouldn't be a ton of those, though. And then hands like 9-7, 8-7, and 9-8. And all those make a lot of logical sense. So I think that this is a reasonably nice hand to go for it. If you had a spade, that would be a little bit better. Like say you had 9 of spades, 7 of hearts. That wouldn't change your turn betting strategy. So that would be a better hand to be betting with because then you block the flush a little bit more. But I would have gone for the all-in just because you really do have one of the worst hands in your range. And when you have one of the worst hands in your range, it's usually fine to go for it. Also, if your opponent had a queen, which is his most likely made hand, that got a lot worse on this river. So whenever the majority of your opponent's made hands get a lot worse, and you could just have the flush, right? You would certainly play a flush draw in this manner. I think this is a spot where I would have gone for it and gone all in. This has been Jonathan Little for dnbpoker.com. Thanks for watching.